The night was thick with tension, the air heavy with the scent of fear. Cosimo de Medici, the most powerful man in Florence, sat in his dimly lit study, his heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the city was in chaos. The streets were filled with panicked citizens, their voices a cacophony of fear and anger. They blamed him, the man who had ruled Florence from the shadows for so long, for the disaster that was unfolding. It was 1453, and Florence was on the brink of war. King Alfonso of Naples, furious that Florence had recognized French claims to his throne, had sent his illegitimate son, Ferrante, to march on the Florentine Republic. Ferrante's army was advancing, and the people of Florence were terrified. They stormed the Palazzo Medici, demanding answers, demanding protection. But Cosimo, usually the calm and collected leader, was at a loss. A merchant burst into his study, his eyes wide with panic. "The Rencine has fallen," he cried, his voice trembling. Cosimo looked up from his desk, his face a mask of confusion. "Rencine? Where is this Rencine?" he asked, as if the name meant nothing to him. But inside, his mind was racing. This was the moment he had feared. The moment when his carefully constructed world might crumble. Cosimo had built his power on a foundation of wealth and influence. He was not the official ruler of Florence, but he was the man who made things happen. His wealth, derived from the Medici Bank, was the lifeblood of the city. He had used his vast resources to maintain a delicate balance of power, keeping Florence safe from its enemies and ensuring the prosperity of its citizens. But now everything was at risk. When Cosimo had first risen to power, he had faced many challenges. He had dealt with wealthy families accumulating too much power by issuing covert warnings, advising them to disperse their wealth or face ruinous taxes. He had outmaneuvered his rivals, including the powerful Albizzi family, and had even survived exile. But now, at the age of 64, he felt the weight of his responsibilities more than ever. His greatest adversary had always been Duke Filippo Maria Visconti of Milan. Filippo was a paranoid and reclusive ruler living in his fortress, terrified of thunder and plots against his life. Despite his bizarre behavior, Filippo was a formidable opponent, constantly threatening Florence's borders. Cosimo had to be clever, using his diplomatic skills to keep Milan at bay. He had even hired the mercenary general Francesco Sforza to protect Florence, a move that had paid off when Sforza eventually became Duke of Milan. But the political landscape was always shifting. When Filippo died without a clear successor, Sforza seized the opportunity to claim the dukedom of Milan. This alliance with Florence's old enemy had brought stability to the region, but it had also made Cosimo's position more vulnerable. Venice, feeling threatened by the Florence-Milan alliance, had broken off relations, and the Medici Bank had suffered significant losses. Now, as the Neapolitan army approached, Cosimo's nerves were frayed. He had always been the man with the answers, the one who could calm the storm, but this time he felt helpless. The citizens of Florence, once so supportive, were turning against him. They saw him as the cause of their troubles, the one who had brought this disaster upon them. As the night wore on, Cosimo's resolve began to waver. He retreated to his bedchamber, his mind a whirl of thoughts and fears. Some said he feigned illness, others that he had actually fallen ill with worry. Whatever the truth, the arch-controller of Florence was at his breaking point. And then, just when all seemed lost, a miracle happened. News arrived that René of Anjou, the French claimant to the Neapolitan throne, was marching south with his army to attack the Neapolitans. Florence was saved, at least for the moment. Cosimo, relieved and exhausted, retired to his country villa at Cafaggiolo to recover, but the threat was far from over. The next challenge would come from Venice, whose empire was now under threat from the Ottoman Turks. The fall of Constantinople had sent shockwaves through Europe, and Italy was no exception. Cosimo knew that the peace he had worked so hard to maintain was fragile, and that the future of Florence and his own power hung in the balance. Cosimo de Medici had always believed that trade brought all mankind together, and that prosperity was the key to power. But in the world of Renaissance politics, even the most astute statesman could find himself at the mercy of fate, and for Cosimo the game was far from over. Cosimo de Medici, the shrewd and powerful banker, had built a vast fortune and influence in Florence, but his success came with risks. One of these risks was his friendship with Francesco Sforza, a man who had ambitions to rule Milan. This friendship did not sit well with Pope Eugenius IV, who was already wary of Cosimo's growing power. As a result, the Medici Bank lost the account handling the papal revenues, a significant blow to their financial standing. However, Cosimo was always prepared for such setbacks. He had already begun cultivating a friendship with Tommaso Perentucelli, a young and brilliant scholar from Tuscany. Perentucelli had a humble background, having been forced to leave his studies due to financial difficulties. He found work in Florence, tutoring the children of Rinaldo degli Albizzi and Paolo Strozzi. It was during this time that he met Cosimo de Medici, who shared his love for books and learning. Cosimo helped Perentucelli set up the Medici Library, which became a center of learning and culture in Florence. When Eugenius IV died in 1447, Perentucelli was elected as his successor, taking the name Pope Nicholas V. Cosimo's foresight paid off, and the Medici Bank regained the papal account. Nicholas V and Cosimo shared a deep friendship, and the Pope often consulted Cosimo on matters of state and culture. Nicholas V even modeled the Vatican Library after the Medici Library, further solidifying the bond between the two. However, the Medici's good fortune did not last. In 1458, Aeneas Piccolomini, a Sienese humanist and friend of Cosimo, became Pope Pius II. Despite their friendship, Pius II chose a Sienese banker for the papal account, dealing another blow to the Medici Bank. Undeterred, Cosimo launched a charm offensive to win back the Pope's favor. He organized lavish events, including a jousting tournament and a pageant featuring his young grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent. Despite these efforts, Pius II remained loyal to the Sienese banker, though he did keep his personal account with the Medici Bank. By this time, Cosimo was an old man, suffering from gout and arthritis. He spent more time at his estates in the Mugello Valley, where he would spend his days pruning vines and supervising the olive harvest. In the evenings, he would discuss Plato with Marsilio Ficino, a philosopher and member of the Platonic Academy, which Cosimo had founded. Despite his physical ailments, Cosimo remained deeply involved in the affairs of Florence, often refusing to pass the reins of power to his sons, Piero and Giovanni, who had disappointed him. Piero, the eldest, was sickly and often bedridden with gout. Giovanni, the younger, was more charming but lacked discipline and often lapsed into grumpiness. Cosimo worried about the future of his family and the city, knowing that many had scores to settle with the Medici. To secure the future, Cosimo used his wit and resources to diffuse conflicts, such as when he sent a rare manuscript to Ferrante of Naples to prevent a potential war. In 1463, Giovanni died of a heart attack, leaving Cosimo devastated. He felt the weight of his legacy and the uncertainty of his son's ability to carry on. As his health declined, Cosimo turned to philosophy, seeking meaning in his life. In 1464, at the age of 74, Cosimo died while listening to Ficino read Plato. His funeral was simple, but the entire city of Florence mourned his passing, and he was remembered as the father of the country. Piero, now known as Piero the Gouty, took over the leadership of Florence. Despite his illness, he was more striking in appearance than his father, and had a hidden depth that Cosimo may not have fully recognized. Piero had married Lucrezia Tornabuoni, a forceful and intelligent woman who played a significant role in the family's patronage of the arts and in shaping their young son, Lorenzo. Piero's gout, inherited from Cosimo, was exacerbated by the rich diet of the time. The upper classes in Florence ate a lot of meat, often served with pungent sauces, and consumed few vegetables. This diet made Piero's condition worse, and he often had to be carried around in a litter. Despite his physical limitations, Piero proved to be a capable leader, making decisions with a clear and focused mind. However, not everyone in Florence was pleased with Piero's rule. Some, like Agnolo Acciaiuoli, a former friend of Cosimo, saw Piero as inadequate. Acciaiuoli believed that Cosimo had become too cautious in his later years, avoiding decisions that required forceful action. This sentiment was shared by others who resented the Medici's growing power. Despite these challenges, Piero maintained his grip on Florence, laying the groundwork for his son Lorenzo to become one of the most celebrated rulers in Florentine history. Piero de Medici, the son of Cosimo, took over the Medici Bank after his father's death. He was cautious and wanted to understand the bank's financial situation. So he asked his father's trusted friend, Diotisalvi Neroni, to look into the books. Neroni, who was ambitious and frustrated with the Medici's rule, decided to scare Piero by exaggerating the bank's problems. He told Piero that the bank was in a bad state, especially because of the war between the Turks and the Venetians, which was affecting trade. Piero, worried about the bank, decided to call in major debts from different branches, including those in London and Bruges. This move didn't help the bank. It made things worse. In London, for example, it became clear that King Edward IV was unlikely to pay back his debts. Similar issues arose in Bruges, and the bank's fortunes in Northern Europe started to decline. In Florence, the situation became more serious. When Piero called in local debts, many merchants faced bankruptcy. This made the merchant class turn against the Medici. Luca Pitti, a wealthy and ambitious banker, became the leader of this growing opposition. Pitti was known for his lavish spending and had even built a grand palace on the hill across the Arno River, which made him a powerful figure in the city. Piero's actions created a divide in Florence. The Medici supporters were called the Party of the Plain, while Pitti's followers were the Party of the Hill. Neroni and a few others joined Pitti's side. Among them was Niccolo Sodrini, a gifted orator from an old Florentine family. Sodrini spoke against the Medici, urging the city to adopt a more democratic system of government. The people began to listen, and Sodrini was elected as the Gonfaloniere, a high-ranking official. However, the merchants soon realized that the new system might lead to chaos, which could harm their businesses. Sodrini's idealistic plans were blocked by the old guard, and he achieved little during his term. The people's support for him waned, and he was mocked as one of the 9 donkeys. Piero, seeing the threat, made a bold move. He sent his son, Lorenzo, to Naples to seek support from King Ferrante. Lorenzo, with his charm and intelligence, won Ferrante's friendship. Meanwhile, Piero was suffering from gout and had to retreat to his villa at Cergi. The conspirators, seeing their chance, sent armies from Ferrara and Venice to capture and kill Piero and Lorenzo. Lorenzo, warned by peasants, managed to return to Florence and alert his father. Piero, despite his illness, was brought back to the city. Galeazzo Sforza, the Duke of Milan, sent 1,500 horsemen to help the Medici. Piero, back in the Palazzo Medici, rallied his supporters. Pitti, fearing he had been abandoned, went to Piero and begged for forgiveness. Piero, showing his magnanimity, pardoned Pitti and even considered marrying Lorenzo to one of Pitti's daughters to heal the city's divisions. Sodrini, Acciaiuoli, and Neroni tried to rally their forces, but the people did not rise up as expected. The conspirators' plans fell apart, and their armies retreated. Piero restored the old system of government, and the city returned to stability. Piero's leniency towards the conspirators backfired. Sodrini and Neroni, now in exile, went to Venice, which was growing concerned about the alliance between Florence and Milan. Venice decided to act against Florence. In 1467, Bartolomeo Colleoni, a famous condottiere, was sent to attack the city with a large army. Piero, acting quickly, sought help from Ferrante and Galeazzo. He appointed Federigo da Montefeltro, a skilled military leader, to command the Florentine forces. Montefeltro tried to avoid a battle, waiting for reinforcements from Milan and Naples. When they arrived, Montefeltro cornered Colleoni's army. However, Galeazzo, the Duke of Milan, allowed the Venetians to escape, claiming he wouldn't take orders from a former junior officer. Montefeltro, no longer hindered by Galeazzo, managed to corner the Venetian army again. A battle ensued, but it was inconclusive. Colleoni retreated to Venice with his army intact. Despite this, Venice decided not to continue the war, and a peace treaty was signed the next year. Piero had successfully secured the old alliance and restored stability in Florence. He was now firmly established as the city's ruler. Piero de Medici, often called Piero the Gouty, took over the Medici Bank and the city of Florence after his father, Cosimo, passed away. Despite his health issues, Piero was a shrewd businessman and a wise ruler. One of his most significant achievements was securing the alum trade, which was crucial for the Medici Bank's continued success. Alum was a vital mineral used to fix dyes in textiles. which was a major industry in Florence and across Europe. For a long time, the best alum came from mines in Asia Minor, but when the Ottoman Turks took control of these mines in 1455, they began to charge exorbitant prices. This meant that European countries were essentially funding the Turks' wars against them. However, in 1462, a massive deposit of high-quality alum was discovered in Talfa, a town in the Papal States. The papal authorities quickly claimed the mines and established a monopoly, threatening excommunication for anyone who used Turkish alum. They even declared that indulgences which forgave sins would not work for those who used Turkish alum. The Medici Bank, being the papal banker, was in a perfect position to take over the alum trade. By 1464, the Medici Bank was handling almost half of the alum mined in Talfa, but the business was not without its challenges. The market was often flooded, causing prices to drop, and the papal authorities were not managing the trade effectively. Piero's father-in-law, Giovanni Tornabuoni, advised him to either quit the trade or secure a monopoly from the papal authorities. In 1465, the situation became more complicated when the Venetian Pope Paul II transferred the papal account from the Medici Bank to a relative. This made it difficult for the Medici Bank to continue in the alum business. Piero decided to take a bold step and sent his 17-year-old son, Lorenzo, to Rome to negotiate a monopoly. Lorenzo, known for his charm and intelligence, was briefed by Piero on what to say. He argued that only the Medici Bank had the resources to transport alum safely to distant markets like London and the Low Countries, where the risks of shipwreck and piracy were high. The Medici Bank could afford to cover these losses, while smaller traders could not. Lorenzo's persuasive skills and Piero's strategic arguments paid off. On April 1, 1466, the Medici Bank was awarded the alum monopoly. This meant that the bank could set higher prices and secure a significant income. The profits from the alum trade were enormous, with estimates suggesting that the bank earned around 70,000 florins per year, which was a massive sum at the time. Piero was not just a businessman. He was also a generous patron of the arts. He continued his father's tradition of supporting artists, commissioning works from painters like Donatello. When Donatello died in 1466, Piero honored his wish to be buried in the church of San Lorenzo, close to Cosimo. This gesture showed the deep respect and empathy the Medici had for the artists they patronized. One of the most interesting artists supported by the Medici was Fra Filippo Lippi. Lippi had a troubled and adventurous life. He was born in Florence around 1406 and was orphaned at a young age. He spent his early years on the streets before being sent to a monastery. While there, he was inspired by the frescoes of Masaccio, a pioneer of Renaissance painting. Lippi learned the techniques of light, perspective, and anatomy from Masaccio, and these skills would later define his own art. Lippi left the monastery to become a painter and had a series of adventures, including being captured by Moorish corsairs and taken to North Africa. He escaped by painting a portrait of the local caliph, who was so impressed that he set Lippi free. Lippi then traveled to Naples, where he worked as a court painter and engaged in less savory activities. Eventually, he returned to Florence and secured a commission from the nuns of Sant'Ambrogio, which brought him to the attention of Cosimo de Medici. Lippi's paintings were known for their realism and individuality. His Madonnas and children were depicted with a naturalness and expressiveness that was revolutionary at the time. Despite his talent, Lippi was often difficult to work with. He was known for his wild behavior, which included running off with the young nun Lucrezia Beauty, whom he used as a model. This caused a scandal, and only Cosimo's influence with the Pope allowed Lippi to be released from his vows and marry Lucrezia. Piero, like his father, showed great patience and understanding toward Lippi. When Lippi failed to complete commissions, he was sometimes confined to a studio in the Palazzo Medici until the work was done. Despite his antics, Lippi's art was so exceptional that the Medici continued to support him. Piero's rule was marked by his ability to maintain peace and stability in Florence. Even as he lay dying from gout, he addressed the issue of young Medici supporters who were causing trouble in the city. He warned them that if the streets were not safe for everyone, he would bring back the exiled heads of rival families. This threat worked, and the streets of Florence remained safe. Piero's legacy was a city at peace, both internally and with its neighbors. He continued the Medici tradition of patronizing the arts and securing the bank's financial success, ensuring that the Medici family's influence would continue long after his death. Lorenzo de Medici, born in 1449, was a product of the richest and most cultured family in Renaissance Florence. His life was a blend of the highest intellectual achievements and the most vivid personal experiences. From a young age, Lorenzo was groomed to lead, but his path was not without challenges. When Piero de Medici, Lorenzo's father, died in December 1469, a delegation of leading Florentine citizens visited the Palazzo Medici to offer their condolences. Led by Tommaso Sodrini, they encouraged the young Lorenzo, just 20 years old, to take on the responsibility of leading the city. Despite his initial reluctance, Lorenzo knew that this was a role he had been prepared for all his life. He accepted the challenge, not just to lead but to protect his family and their friends, as well as their vast wealth and influence. Lorenzo's early years were shaped by a loving and supportive family. His grandfather, Cosimo de Medici, was a doting figure who often put his grandson's happiness above state affairs. One memorable story tells of Cosimo interrupting a meeting with delegates from Lucca to help Lorenzo carve a stick into a flute. This anecdote reveals the deep affection and the importance of family in the Medici household. Lorenzo's mother, Lucrezia Tornabuoni, was a powerful and artistic influence. She introduced a creative side to the Medici legacy that had not been present before. This artistic sensibility would become a defining feature of Lorenzo's leadership and his patronage of the arts. The Medici family's move into the Palazzo Medici on Via Larga, just 5 years before Lorenzo's birth, marked a significant shift in their lifestyle. Unlike the traditional clan-like living of the past, the new palazzo allowed for a more private and individual family life. This change fostered closer bonds within the family and influenced Lorenzo's relationships with his mother and younger brother, Giuliano. Lorenzo's education was exceptional. He studied Latin with Gentile Beccai, who instilled in him a love for poetry and rhetoric. Later, he learned Greek from Marsilio Ficino, a leading humanist who introduced him to Plato's philosophy. Lorenzo's involvement in the Platonic Academy, where he engaged in high-level intellectual debates, shaped his mind and character. He also developed a passion for hunting, sports, and music, which made him a well-rounded and charismatic leader. Despite his impressive intellectual and personal qualities, Lorenzo's physical appearance was unremarkable. He had a sallow complexion, heavy-lidded eyes, and a broad, squashed nose. His voice was harsh, but his wit and charm made him attractive to others. This contrast between his appearance and his inner qualities became a defining aspect of his character. Lorenzo's life was a series of contrasts. He could be grave and serious one moment and playful and joyful the next. His friend, the poet Angelo Poliziano, described a day spent with Lorenzo, full of singing, serious discussions, and lively social activities. This duality in his personality, the ability to participate fully in the joys of life while also reflecting on its deeper meanings, was a key aspect of his leadership. As he grew into his role, Lorenzo faced the challenge of maintaining the Medici's influence without the formal title of ruler. He had to balance the actual power he held with the republican ideals of Florence. This delicate balance required skill and diplomacy, and Lorenzo proved to be more than capable. He used his charm, intelligence, and strategic thinking to navigate the complex political landscape of Renaissance Italy. Lorenzo's leadership was not without its flaws. His lack of interest in the family bank would later become a problem, but for the most part, he relied on trusted managers to handle the business side of things. His primary focus was on the arts, culture, and the well-being of Florence. He became known as a patron of the arts, supporting artists like Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci, and fostering a cultural renaissance that would influence the world for centuries to come. Lorenzo de Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, was a leader who embodied the spirit of the Renaissance. His life was a testament to the power of education, art, and personal charisma. He faced the challenges of his time with grace and determination, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire.